Hello and welcome to the show. Now, the Brothers Grimm have a lot to answer for, I think. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were German academics who collected, translated, and published folklore and fairy tales, crystallizing and popularizing many of the stories that have illustrated our childhoods and painted our cultures. And if you ever go back and read them, some of those fairy tales were really dark. Now, one of those cautionary tales was the story of Kulig Kluk, variously known around the world as Henny Penny, Chicken Licken, or Chicken Little. And in the tale, our eponymous hero gets hit on the head by an acorn. Now, rather than simply looking up and understanding the risks posed by standing beneath an oak tree, Chicken Licken instead leaps to the conclusion that the entire sky is falling in. So much squawking does he make around the farm that he manages to convince his colleagues and his social media followers that the world is in fact about to fall in on them. And the story ends, depending on which version you read, with the cunning Foxy Loxy taking full advantage of their ill-founded fear. Like I say, those tales were dark. But, I hear you ask, what has this cautionary tale about bad actors taking advantage of misinformation and mild hysteria to fill their bellies? What has this all got to do with cybersecurity awareness? Well, if it wasn't already abundantly obvious, then joining us to tell us more is, as always, our very own Brother Grimm. It's Meta Compliance Chief Evangelist and author of Cybersecurity Awareness for Dummies, Robbie O'Brien. Hello, Robbie.
Hi, David. Well, here, you can't beat a good story. Mind you, I thought Chicken Licken had something to do with Kentucky Fried Chicken, but that's maybe my background, okay? Well, today we're going to talk about dealing with the things you can control and accepting the things that you have no control over.
Our special guest for today, our second Brother Grimm. Well, let's see. It's cybersecurity consultant at Pwn Defend and social media warrior at Mr. Reboot, Daniel Card. Hello, Daniel. How you doing?
Hey, guys. Good to be here.
Great to meet you. Good to see the face behind the Twitter handles. For any of our audience who aren't aware about your epic work online, and I'm sure with actual clients as well, just give us a bit about your story.
I am a cybersecurity consultant. I'm a government security advisor, and I've been working in technology and cybersecurity for a long time. Don't even want to mention the number of years. My beard is literally going grey, so that's a sign of the times, right? I'm an enterprise architect, offensive security consultant. I generally help customers try and improve their cybersecurity posture and understand their current position. And then, obviously, if they get into a bad scenario, I try and make the scenario end a little bit nicer than it would otherwise.
Good work. Good work. Well, we opened today with that timeless tale of mass hysteria, farmyard gossip, and the dangers of not verifying information. But Robbie, that's just a fairy tale, isn't it? Surely, as 20th century adults, we're too smart to be chicken lickins, turkey lurkies, or goosey loosies, aren't we?
I think there's a lot of stuff talked about cybersecurity on social media. It's a topical subject, right? And I think what people forget is a lot of the things that are talked about, and even a lot of the stuff that the some Gartner analysts talk about, they're aspirational or theoretical positions. But the reality is many organizations have the immediate problem of their legacy systems. They have their own culture in their organization. They have budget constraints. And for me, the day job of people in information security is the discipline that it takes to grind out a proper threat defense that's tailored to their organization. And I suppose we go back to the world is on fire. The reality is that if you listen to all the things that you should be doing, you'll get nothing done. And probably the realization is that the solution to it all is rather boring. It's down in things like putting into place the proper controls, policies, frameworks, and really layering up to a point that brings you to best practice. So I think you have a very simple situation where, on the one hand, social media is telling everybody one thing. Typically, an hourly basis trying to set everyone's hair on fire, and no doubt about it, we have, clear and present dangers everywhere, but the day job is something completely different. And I think that's a subject that's worth a lot of discussion.
Daniel, I don't know very much about your client work, but I do see you on social media. You have a lot of engagement, some very popular accounts, certainly within the cybersecurity community. So it strikes me that you're exposed probably more than most to the whims of the internet, the whims of opinion when it comes particularly to cybersecurity issues. What's your take on the misinformation thing, on the skies falling in thing? Do you get a sense that, that there's not a great deal of verification of fact out there, and we are kind of following chicken licking in the crowd?
Yeah, I mean, the chicken licking thing's good, right? Like, the sky is always falling down. If you go on to LinkedIn or Twitter or anywhere really, I think because security is into cybersecurity, computers are magic boxes to quite a lot of people, right? So it's really easy for the FUD crowds to ramp up on nothing. And it's really quite difficult because I think as a whole, people aren't very good at threat modeling, right? There's all this context, there's all this complexity, there's all this understanding that you need. Or you could tell everyone that everything's going to get them and that there's hordes of hackers on trains and that are waiting to pounce, or the Starbucks Wi-Fi that they're going to get killed by. And I think it's really difficult because it's a space where a lot of this stuff is complicated. There's a lot of potential, right? There is a lot of harm as well, right? Like we've just seen the NHS supply chain attack. But how do you to understand how to cut through all the noise? A, requires contextualization, which we may not have, right? I use the world's internet surface plus my client work to try and try and get a baseline of what's interesting versus does it matter. And when I say does it matter, I mean, does it matter to national security? Does it matter to everyday folk? Is it a present threat? Is this something that we actually need to run around screaming about? Because if we keep telling everybody the sky is falling down, they don't listen to us. Living in a constant state of Amber Alert, constant state of heightened awareness or being vigilant. I have no idea how to stay vigilant all the time. It's impossible. It would make you a mental wreck, I imagine. Not a doctor, obviously, but and I think that's part of the struggle, right? So you've got all of this marketing, sales, FUD. You can literally run around the internet going like, this is going to destroy all your computers and everything's going to hurt you and patch every day and all of this stuff. And when I talk to people that aren't nerds, the perception I get from people is that this stuff becomes very, I would say, I'm going to use my words, boring, dull, and uninteresting very quickly if you're telling someone that everything they do in life is a significant risk. They just switch off. So I think that when we look at like misinformation, and I wouldn't even say like intentional versus unintentional, how people navigate that, I think very much changes a lot. I do like corporate password audits. So I literally see everyone's passwords to some extent. I review breach data. I also work with some people individually, and I get to see all of their stuff. And the world I see versus the world that people describe, they're often quite different. People like to say what they think the recipient wants to hear, often, I think, or what they read in a textbook. And reality isn't a textbook. And so when we take the sort of reality of the world, you take then the human nature element, and then you take in social media, news, whatever, sources of intelligence. I use that word loosely because some intelligence is marketing, or just plain made up stuff. I think it's really hard for people to understand where they are. And then again, it's like, okay, so the recipients or the general population have got a challenge. You get a policymaker challenge. A bit like people saying, oh, we've been cybered, so as a country, we're going to cyber you back. You don't like attack something on a dime, right? Like if you just said, oh, I want to get into this company, it's actually quite difficult. Phishing people takes time. It might take you half a year. You've got logistics and planning and all of the other boring stuff like legal stuff that people seem to ignore on the internet, and not being a criminal, and not starting a war. I think this space is so complicated. So it's really easy for people to leverage the magic black box into that fear, uncertainty, and doubt perspective, and as part of that, that disinformation piece. So I think it's a complex space to navigate from a human point of view.
The hazing that you mentioned there, Daniel, people being on this constant state of alert, it feels as though, yes, that is certainly something that we are encouraging people to, well, I guess alert, awareness, there's some furry lines between them, but it is exhausting. And to bring in another tale, you've got The Boy Who Cried Wolf as well, and you can only kind of stick your head and say, oh, look, so many times before people start to ignore you. Robbie, this is something that you battle with, I'm sure, every single day with what you do to try and get people to take notice in the right way to the right things.
And I think it was one of the reasons I got into this was that, I mean, some of the education, some of the communication that the industry gives to ordinary people is appalling. It's like lowest common denominator, tick box, just have any type of education so that we can say, well, we told them so, right? And that only adds to the fatigue. It only adds to people becoming numb to the problems. And so I think you have to turn it on its head and say, well, how can we make that connection with people and get them to focus on the things that we want them to focus on and ignore the rest? And so blanket bombing everybody with the same rubbish is the number. You're better not to do anything, and like as in dial it down and then focus on the things that you want people to do. It's also very relevant, or it's also very particular to your industry. It's also very particular to your role. People in a design function, in a marketing team, are less likely to get any attention than somebody who is, say, a senior DevOps engineer with access to passwords. I mean, the designer doesn't have any real, they aren't someone who's going to be focused on. So it's proportionality. You don't have to train everybody the same, and I think that's harder. But like the people that need to be made vigilant could simply be helped by bringing everybody in the room and having an honest adult conversation about this is what we should be watching out for on a regular basis. And I know that's not easy, it's not possible, but it's sort of like where the rubber meets the road. The more human you can make the connection, the more human you can personalize to the person's role, the more you'll get people to actually wake up out of their slumber and help you. And I think that's the key. If people are helping us with the problem, it makes it easier. When you start to do the controls, you start to do the frameworks, you need people's help. You need people to report the incidents. You need people to follow the policies or acknowledge the policies. And they'll do that if they understand the why of it, as opposed to you just saying, because you have to.
That's the workforce angle, which is good. And you talk about the personalization piece there and how important that could be. As far as the leadership's concerned, Daniel, do you get a sense from the clients that you deal with that they also have the tools that they need to be able to work out what they should be listening to? Because there's a lot of noise from media, and I put my hands up, I'm certainly part of that, from social media, from other parts of the industry, and from colleagues. What chance do they have to know what it is that they should be listening to, and to, I guess, prioritize what it is that they should be listening to as well, to ensure that they are addressing the right issues first?
We talk a lot about the skills gap as an industry, right? There's a skills gap, there's a workforce gap, and there's all this stuff that people say around that space. And it's all about getting people in to cyber. Whereas actually, what I see in the community, because across the world, but in workforces, right? There are skills gaps. There's skills gaps in technology spaces. There's sysadmins that can't PowerShell. There's, technical problems in that space. That's not really what I see as the fundamental problem. That can be solved quite simply with money and time and care. Going into where I do see issues are how do leaderships make decisions? What do they take as information? What are they being led with from a thought point of view? And that often is very skewed from where I see the world and how I recommend doing cyber defense. It's very much tick box. It's very much lightweight thinking, I think would be the way to describe it. And it isn't that people don't care, but it's a really complicated subject. So it starts getting into the whole, not everyone's getting pwned every day. It's going to happen to us one day. You see lots of this type of conversation happening with people. And the whole security taking it seriously phrase, people don't take it as seriously as they necessarily say in the way I see it. And then you have the fact that you've got to spend money on this stuff. And at a macroeconomic level, are we actually in a society position? I'm talking the UK here, but I'm sure this covers more than that. Do we have the right economic environment? Because organizations do not invest, in my opinion, in the right way to improve their cybersecurity postures. And they don't treat this as cyber defense. It's very much a compliance exercise. It's winning a badge for sales. It's doing something because they have to. And let's be honest here, a lot of organizations have contractual requirements that from a security point of view, when you go and scratch under the surface, they don't actually meet. So I think it's a really tough position, right? Like I've seen stuff where CEOs have signed off contracts with customers and their team have basically told them, yes, we do all of this. And actually those controls and they're not in the environment. The CEO is not going to be generally skilled to the point of going, do you know what, I'm going to go and check out that conditional access policy and make sure it actually doesn't have basically everyone excluded. Or I'm going to go and look at the supply chain assurance, which was a form that we sent someone. And actually, given the nature of service, you actually needed to do an actual audit. Again, you will see TPRM, third-party risk management, thrown around on LinkedIn like it's a bit of candy. And I've done stuff like we've had to have environments accredited and had to have authority to operate. And, you've got choices in this stuff, right? It's not, have you checked it? It's, well, okay, that's really important. And actually, in our contract, I want a clause as a business owner. I want a clause to audit, right? And again, you can look at how that's funded, but that's going in and saying to your supply chain, I'm going to come and look. I'm not just going to take your word for it. So how the mechanics of governance work, I think, again, I don't think there's the common understanding at a leadership level in organizations of what they can do from a business point of view.
That doesn't sound to me, though, Robbie, as though that really should be a problem. That is make sure you're doing your job. Or, by the way, did you know that this was part of your job? That doesn't feel as though it's a fundamentally difficult problem to fix. So why do we see these gaps?
I think if we were brutally honest, there is a huge disconnect between the reality in on the ground with the people responsible for putting the infrastructure and the defense around that infrastructure and the systems together. And then you have the people that run the business. And in the private sector, the business is run from a set of budgets back. In government, that should be the same. And the drivers associated with the both are completely different. And technology is seen in the same way as a chair, in the same way as a desk. It's just another thing that somebody else looks after. Where in actual fact, we are at a stage where we are so utterly dependent on it that it is more like the oxygen in the room that the financial people breathe. That's where we're at, and that is the disconnect. I know that sounds trite, but if they didn't have the systems, they would not be accountants. Like we are decades past the point where they can go back to paper. Decades. And we are at the point where the systems that we're using is the oxygen of the business. So you would never hear that within a boardroom. What I've just said would never be heard within a boardroom, which means that disconnect is worse in that my overriding sense when I talk to either parties, and I do it all the time, is that the people on the technical side are like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. You can't handle the truth, right? and the guys up here are sort of on the deck of the Titanic, thinking they're going to be in New York soon, and completely oblivious to the icebergs that are floating around. That sort of feels to me the mood music behind it, and that's a hard gap to jump. It's hard to get the communication around the cybersecurity stuff, the system stuff to the C-level. And I tend to find that you only get it when Daniel's brought in. So we've had a major breach, and suddenly all the fairy tales that have been talked about, be it supply chain security, be it tabletop exercises that we've done, it comes home to roost, and the reality is, did you do it? Are those things there? And again, in an awful lot of situations where I have been involved in this type of thing, they were fugazis. They were written on pages. They were produced to get compliance text boxes, and there was no real intent from the outset to do it right. And that's sort of harsh in one way, but if you look at the number of gratuitously eye-watering data leaks that we've had, I mean, it's ridiculous at the minute. It's just ridiculous. And there has to be a systemic reason for that. And I think it's a number of things, but it's basically that disconnect between the people that do and the people that think that it's being done.
So, Daniel, of bringing endorsement there from Robbie, in terms of adopting this more risk-based approach to, assessing cybersecurity risk and then working out what you're going to do about it, when you're brought in for a consultancy intervention to, help organizations you work with best understand what it is that's hitting them, how do you counsel them? How do you work with them to work on that prioritization piece, to work out which fires they really should be fighting first, what framework to follow?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, because prioritization is probably the hardest piece, right? I mean, one of the things that I try and do is get a good understanding of the architecture and landscape, right? If you don't know what you've got, you can't defend it. That's like fact. Another thing to do, obviously, again, this is a super wide subject, but one of the things that I look at as well is, as well as doing technical discovery, you do obviously business discovery, but also you align it to threat, because there's certain things that you really don't want to happen. This one's pretty easy, right? Like, think of the bad stuff that you really don't want to occur, write them down in stories. You could call it a risk plan, but write down what you really don't want to happen. It's like, I really don't want to get ransomware, right? And so then follow through the typical ransomware kill chains and see if they're affected and see what the blast radius is and all the usual buzzwords in that space. But go and look, is this possible to happen to me? Are my backups domain joined? If they are, and I say domain joined, I mean primary, core, backend, domain, not that you can't have a domain backup. Go and look at what happened in real instance and go and check. Like, if you jump into an Active Directory and you do a quick audit, you'll usually find a range of things that could lead to privilege escalation. So let's say someone's VPN credentials get stolen. Okay, cool. We've got Jane Smith. Her VPN credentials stolen. There's only single factor authentication. A baddie has got into the network on the VPN. They generally then have complete wide open net access. The bad guys will usually then typically go for Active Directory. And then they'll run across like Kerberoasting, they'll look at Active Directory certificate services, privilege escalations, and they will look at a mechanism to go from standard user to administrate. That's God mode, right? So like you own everything.
Yeah, but one thing, the example that you give there about a loose credential leading to privilege escalation, leading to, you know, a domain-wide, organization-wide ransomware attack. That's not sexy. I mean, okay, ransomware has a certain sexiness about it, but you look at the whatever today's big vulnerability is sweeping the internet, the kind of Hollywood style stuff that gets the headlines, gets the retweets or whatever, reexes, whatever we're supposed to call them these days. I don't even know. Whereas really it's the kind of fundamental stuff that you talk about there that is, I mean, you tell me, it's that stuff. That's the bigger threat rather than what some security researcher in San Jose has found could potentially be a vulnerability given 4 or 5 stars aligning.
Yeah, and this is okay. I'll bring up the recent one. And obviously, in the cybersecurity world, things change. You get new intel, exploits become available. You know, the world changes fast. But recent one, there's a vulnerability in the wireless drivers for Windows, right? Client, like all versions, etc.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if you're within, and I'm going to use this as an example, obviously variables occur in life. Just before everyone sort of storms my Twitter feed when they see this, you've got to be within what, like 30 feet of Wi-Fi range. And I was quoted in Forbes the other day saying, "If you're that close, I can punch you." You've got this Wi-Fi vulnerability, and it's like, oh my god, everyone can get root. Well, it's a kernel level driver, so they're probably going to blue screen you more than actually remote code execute. But that aside, they've got to be really close. And also, like most people's PCs, I'm not saying everyone's, but most people's laptops and desktops patched. These aren't servers, they're not mission critical, they generally get patched. There are some manufacturing and some other niche spaces where that isn't the case, but so you've got to be really close, you've got to have an unpatched machine, and you've got to have someone with intent who's willing to risk physically being attacked.
Being punched.
Security, being punched, having law enforcement get them, being on CCTV, having all their signals. There's a lot of stuff, right? If you're going to go and commit crime, you've got to put some effort in if you're going to go physical. And so I'm sitting there going, yeah, okay, cool. Like some people need to take awareness of that. Most people don't even need to know about it because their machine should be patched. If we're in 2024 and they need to know about every single patch, that's weird. If they need to be told every day to patch, that's weird. Like this isn't new, is it? Like
no.
People's phones automatically update. I'm not saying the iPhone automatic update process is perfect, but largely speaking, I think it's a lot better than say 20 years ago. So as an industry, we're still going everyone patch, and then tomorrow we're going to say everyone patch because the sky's falling down. And as you say, like the reality is like, and as a business, context is key, obviously. I sit there going like, cool, if I have to really worry about patch and how I release that, my business defense process and my governance, that's all broken. I don't care about what vulnerability it is. I care about being able to go, cool, scheduled, emergency release, retrospective change, or whatever, like process. And I used to do this for 25,000 seats. 3 a.m, patches come in, start deploying. If it was an emergency, ActiveX, we did RCE. We'd be like, cool, there'd be a quick interchange with one of the directors. And basically, I was saying, we're deploying this. Wasn't really asking. And they'd say, cool, no problem, Dan, let me know what you need. And we'll start the process immediately, right? And again, it's not that difficult, this stuff. It does require time, effort. But you start staggering across your sites. You start dog fooding. You start getting this stuff in your test environments. You've got to look after it. You've got to do the work. And that work requires business change. And it requires people helping you do it. It needs support. It needs investment. It needs time. It needs quality. It needs people to, and I say care, it needs them to care enough to do things differently, probably, right? That's some orgs will not have this. There will be the unicorns out there. But it's the whole business change. And, if you move my stuff around, I get the hump. I know that. So doing cyber change is business change. And that, I think, is a huge challenge.
I mean, this comes back to what Robbie was talking about earlier on about the your workforce understanding the why this is important, and in the vast majority of cases, people care about the company that they work about, and they want to do the right thing, but that doesn't stop it from being difficult. What you described there is a very long triangle with likelihood of this thing happening versus the risk of that thing happening. And I guess another way of looking at that is it the Pareto rule, the 80-20 rule, or something like that, Robbie? You know, kind of a
Pareto rule, yeah. And
yeah.
I think that for me, the 80-20 rule helps with sanity, because you got to accept that you cannot deal with all this input. I mean, the Wi-Fi concept that uh, Daniel just talked about, you know, with cybersecurity, we almost have 24/7 news as well, where they have to fill that news with something, right? They have to fill that news with the latest exploit, the latest data breach, the latest new tool, whatever. It's an industry. Let's accept that. But you have to take that for what it is, and realize it's just another feed which you can just turn it off. And then when you do that, you realize you're back to what you just said. You're back to threat, you're back to risk. You know, what is the impact, and what is the likelihood? And as Dan says, it boils down to the things that you have to defend. The reality is that's all deadly boring for the technical guys. But it is, in my opinion, it is really where the rubber meets the road, because you will never find perimeter devices that protect you against everything. I mean, I'm not, you need them, but at the end of the day, the hackers are coming in through social engineering, coming in through people's mistakes. And that's the hardest bit to address. And it's back to the change thing. I completely agree. Cyber change is organizational change. And every organization that I've worked for has the dead bodies of previous change initiatives littered behind them. I mean, they never work. They never work because priorities change, somebody moves job, nobody can be bothered, and the whole thing crashes and burns. So I actually think that we are reaching a new phase where I do believe there are two things coming that will change things. Number one, I think the gratuitous levels of data breaches, that will not be allowed to continue. And the second thing is governments won't allow it to continue. So you're starting to see a lot more talk about CISOs finding themselves with litigation, CEOs being involved in that litigation, be it, you know, through DORA, through the SEC stuff that has come in. And the governments will sort of go, you know, clean up your act or you're going to go to jail. That sounds, in the cyber world, new. In the financial services world, we've had 30 years of it. And it started out back in the day with Enron. It started out where people were signing off sets of accounts, and behind it was all nonsense. To the extent where we are now with financial services, they can't move without compliance. So they've gone the complete opposite direction. We're still in the Wild West phase, which is why it feels this sort of chaotic.
Before we wrap up today, let's just take a bit of a sort of topical sidebar. Daniel, you mentioned that magical word FUD earlier on, and you know, we know the dangers that fear, uncertainty, and doubt can bring, and there's certainly a lot of FUD around the current wave, hype cycle, bubble of generative AI, as technology brands, to my mind anyway, have been racing ahead to incorporate AI associated features into their platform for fear that they don't get left behind. And that inevitably is causing privacy and security problems. And I think we should probably just chat about one of those. And at the time of recording, it's particularly interesting. A quick explainer on what Microsoft Recall is, for those who maybe haven't been so close to the story. May 2024, at Microsoft Build, which is the company's annual developer conference, Microsoft announced a new photographic memory feature called Recall that essentially it takes snapshots of a computer screen every 5 seconds, I think it is, while there's activity going on there. And that could be images, your browsing, the pages that you're browsing on the web, files, photos, emails, anything in theory on screen gets stored in a local archive. Your PC does some on-device analysis, some OCR and so on, to index that content, all with the aim that you can search that archive using natural language to create what Microsoft calls an explorable timeline of your PC's past. Needless to say, information security community raised some concerns about this. And the more that people understood what was happening, the more the privacy concerns grew. In the UK, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, our data watchdog here, said that it was making inquiries with Microsoft to understand the safeguards in place to protect privacy. And at the time we're chatting right now, Microsoft just announced that it is, Big Rabbit says here, adjusting the release model for Recall to leverage the expertise of the Windows Insider community, its beta testers and so on, to ensure the experience meets our high standards for quality and security. So, gents, your take on this and the risks that this clamor to AI-ify, I might have made that word up, but you know what I mean, AI-ify everything that moves. There's some real risks to that, aren't there, Robbie?
I think there's some real risks to it. And it's like functionality that we never asked for, because some product people thought it would be a good idea for us to do X, Y, and Z. I also think that the AI organizations want to access data stores to be able to train their language models, become more useful and more clever. And I don't see an awful lot of CISOs putting up their hands and saying, you know what, we need more AI, we need more systems to deal with. If anything, I think an awful lot of this is just adding to the burden. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is being snuck under the door in the form of an enhancement to a product, and in this case, a new product that's going to make your life easier. There's a point in time in the States where you needed a court order to get a recording device and a tap on somebody's phone. So this sort of really resonated with the InfoSec community, and I think some really good work with people like Mr. Bowman, and Dan helped maybe a rethink to a badly thought out product that was going to cause lots of data privacy and also create a bad precedent, in my opinion.
Daniel, you were on the front line of this on the web, on the social medias. What's your summary of how the community responded to this? And well, let's say the community was able to enforce some change of direction from Microsoft here.
It was such an insane feature, in my opinion, to just put as default it's spyware. And I was watching Kev Beaumont and some of the research community, and people were ripping it apart. It was stored in clear text. You could get to it. You've got local admin rights. You could get to it remotely by, remotely accessing a computer. And Microsoft was saying it's only local. It's like,
have you not heard of a rat before? My word.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the whole thing was in my mind insane. And I didn't even need to. Normally, if it's something that I think is important, I would put more words in. I didn't even need to. I was just making total recall gifts and jokes and just looking at it, going, guys, like, what are you doing? And that what I really like about that is that you can see the pressure from the customer. Right? In the end, we're all Microsoft customers. It's saying, we don't want this. This is a privacy and security nightmare. I don't even personally really understand what it does. We've got features, digital forensics already exists. We've got internet history. You've got your email, you've got chat history. I mean, you really want to record your screen? I mean, I don't. I mean, I look at, a range of stuff. This stuff recorded passwords. It OCRs everything on the screen. Like, what planet would someone be on? I'll give an example. I'm looking at someone's breach data. I'm looking at a breach for a customer. I'm looking at some criminals' content. I don't want a recording of that. right? Obviously, it's a bit different. I don't want recording of lots. It's easy. We put right event filters on and, wipe and load and stuff, right? But why would my mum or, Joe Blogs want this on their home device, on their corporate? I just cannot, for the life of me, think, hey, did you not know what you did yesterday? I mean, my memory's terrible, but we can write stuff down. We can write notes. We have diaries. We have PAs. We have all these mechanisms. But what we really need is a computer to record your screen every 5 seconds, Wi-Fi, I don't know, and then store that all in a database that's OCR'd and indexed. Call it AI. I mean,
that was my take. This isn't AI.
But it's just nuts anyway, isn't it? Like, ignoring the security elements of this. Just 1 second. Chat, would you want that on your phone or your PC device?
Yeah. I do use screenshots. I know the key combination very, very well. But that is me going, oh, yes, I must remember these train times in the web browser so I can come back tomorrow to book them or whatever it is. I'm in complete control of that. And they go into a folder and I know exactly where it is. But, that is me in control of it. What the Microsoft recall proposal was that, has been, they're having a second look at that, is something entirely different, which, I think most people who understand what's happening and understand the risk being posed by it, as you put very well, Daniel, would certainly go, I don't feel comfortable with this at all.
I can't work out. I said to my missus the other day, I said, I might be wrong. So this just feels massively overhyped. There's so much money being poured.
Yeah.
I'm seeing statements. I haven't managed to even fact check some of this, but there's people saying, we've been doing AI forever. And I'm like, no, you haven't. In fact, we can see in your marketing materials that's not true. I would suggest is that you can't solve complex human problems with technology.
I think you're right. Yeah, completely.
Well, Daniel, thank you for sitting on the fence so ably for us there. I think we're going to have to leave it for there today, gents. Thank you so much for sharing all of your insights. Daniel, thank you for joining us on the show today. Where can people find out more about your work online? Where can they follow you?
The best place to follow me is on Twitter, on UK_Daniel_card. I'm on LinkedIn, but I use Deception. So if you can find me, feel free to connect. But my name and stuff changes on it on a regular basis. So Twitter is is the place to come and find.
Very good. Robbie, the Brothers Grimm were collecting stories some 200 years ago, but do you think if they were alive and looking for stories today, they might stop by and take a look at the yarn that Meta Compliance has been spinning with cyber police?
I don't know. So for me, follow me, David. I'm active on like Dan on X and also on LinkedIn. I'm regularly in entertaining the world with my view on things, and yes, we try and create these entertaining different ways of getting people to connect with cybersecurity, and that's going really well.
So season 3 has recently dropped in the last few months. So let's see what happens next. Watch this space, and make sure you do watch this space. Join us next time we're here. But for now, Daniel, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And Robbie, thank you too.
Pleasure.
And thank you all for tuning in today too. Until next time, bye-bye.